July 2026. California was baking under the worst heat wave in state history when something else dropped out of that orange sky. It was not a heat mirage. It was not a wildfire ember. It was a ship. If you love a good underdog story, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment when you get to the part with the watermelon cannon, because you will know exactly which part I mean. Now let's step into this journey, because what happened next on one almond farm in the Central Valley changed everything. Kern County does not do heat waves quietly. By the second week of July, the thermometer outside the Coldwater Bend gas station had been stuck above 113 degrees for 6 straight days. And the digital sign out front had actually stopped updating because the sun had cooked the display board twice already. The almond orchard stretched out flat and pale under a sky the color of a dirty dish rag. Dust devils spinning lazily between the rows where irrigation water used to run before the drought restrictions cut everyone's allotment in half. Hank Calloway had farmed that same 200 acres his whole life, same as his father before him, and he had learned a long time ago that in a valley summer, the land did not care about your feelings. He walked the east irrigation line that morning with a wrench in his back pocket, checking for cracked fittings. Because plastic pipe left out in 116-degree heat had a bad habit of splitting open like a hot dog on a grill. Behind him, his dog Tank, a broad-chested Rhodesian ridgeback with a scar over one eye from an argument with a rattlesnake he had technically lost, trotted along sniffing at the dry ground. Back at the farmhouse, Patty Calloway had the porch door propped open with a brick, mostly because the state had asked everyone to conserve power during the heat emergency. And running the air conditioner all day felt like begging for a rolling blackout. She had her radio on the kitchen counter, tuned low to the local station, half listening to the same drought warning that had been playing on repeat since June. She was canning tomatoes because even during a heat emergency, a valley kitchen did not stop working, it just sweated more. Around 11 that morning, the birds went quiet. Not gradually. All at once, the way they do right before a storm, except there was no storm coming. There had not been a real storm in that valley in months. Tank stopped in the middle of the orchard row and went stiff, ears up, a low growl building somewhere behind his ribs. Hank straightened up from the irrigation line and looked around, wrench still in his hand, and noticed something strange about the heat shimmer over by the equipment barn. Heat shimmer in the valley was nothing new. On a day like this, the whole horizon rippled and bent, turning fence posts into wobbling smears and making distant trucks look like they were floating an inch off the asphalt. Hank had seen it his whole life, but this particular shimmer was not spread out across the horizon. It was gathered into one spot, thick and swirling, right above the equipment barn roof, and it was not moving with the heat waves around it. It was moving on its own. He set the wrench down slow, the way you do when you are not sure yet if you are looking at something dangerous or just something your eyes were playing tricks on in the heat. The shimmer folded in on itself, and where there had been nothing but hot air and dust a second before, there was now a shape. Long, black, and smooth, low enough to the ground that it had been hiding right behind the barn roofline the whole time. It settled onto the dirt without so much as kicking up dust, which struck Hank as the wrong kind of quiet for something that big. Tank was already barking. Patty heard it from the kitchen and set down her canning tongs, wiping her hands on her apron, walking to the porch door and squinting out across the yard at the heat haze rolling off the fields. She could see Hank standing stock still near the barn, and she could see something else too, something that did not belong anywhere near her tomatoes or her husband. "Hank," she called out, "what in the world is that?" Hank did not answer right away because a section of the black hull had just split open with a low hiss. And a ramp was lowering down into the dust, and whatever was about to walk down, it was clearly not from Kern County and clearly not from anywhere close. 6 figures came down that ramp in armor the color of wet asphalt, moving in a tight formation like they had rehearsed it 1,000 times on 1,000 other worlds. Each one carried a weapon that hummed faintly, a low electric buzz that did not belong anywhere near an almond orchard. Their leader stepped off the ramp last, taller than the rest, with a chest plate lined in glowing amber strips that pulsed slightly like it was breathing. Hank did not run. Running was not really in his nature, And besides, his knees were not what they used to be. He just stood there with his wrench, watching 6 armored figures spread out across his own dirt, and felt something in him settle into the same stubborn, calm his father used to get right before throwing a trespasser off the property. Tank, on the other hand, had already made up his mind. He came across that yard low and fast, 90 pounds of muscle and bad attitude, and hit the lead alien square in the knee joint hard enough to buckle it sideways into the dust. The rest of the squad froze for a half-second, weapons swinging toward the dog. And that half-second was exactly long enough for Patty to come off the porch with the biggest thing she could reach on her way out the door. It happened to be the pressure canner lid, 12 inches of solid aluminum still slightly warm from the stove. She threw it the way she had once thrown a softball back in high school, and it caught the second alien across the side of its helmet with a flat metallic clang that echoed off the barn. The creature staggered sideways into an irrigation valve and went down in a tangle of limbs. Hank finally moved, closing the distance with the wrench raised, and swung it hard into the wrist of the alien nearest him, knocking its weapon loose into the dirt. "Y'all mind telling me what you're doing on my property?" Hank said, breathing hard, standing over the fallen weapon. The lead alien, still shaking dust off its amber chest plate, activated something on its collar, and a flat mechanical voice came out of it. "This world has been designated for Dominion resource extraction. You will submit." Hank looked at Patty. Patty looked at Hank. "He wants us to submit," Patty said. "I heard him. Tell him we already got a water board telling us what to do with this land, and they've been a real headache lately, too." The alien commander did not appreciate the joke, and raised a weapon toward Hank's chest. That was the moment Patty remembered the garden hose was still running behind her, hooked up to a spigot that had been sitting under the valley sun since sunrise, filling that hose with water hot enough to make coffee. She grabbed the nozzle and cranked it wide open, catching the commander square in the face with a blast of near-boiling water at point-blank range. The scream that came out of that translator box was not a word in any human language, but everybody standing in that yard understood the tone just fine. 3 more aliens went down in the next 30 seconds, one tripped by Tank, one clipped across the helmet by a second thrown canner lid, and one simply backing away so fast it fell straight into the irrigation ditch behind the barn, which, thanks to the drought, was thankfully mostly dry, but still lined with enough sharp gravel to leave a mark. The squad broke formation and scrambled back up the ramp, dragging their half-conscious commander behind them, and the ship lifted off the dirt in a hurry, wobbling slightly as it climbed, like it had somewhere it badly needed to be. Hank picked his wrench back up off the ground and looked over at Patty, who was still holding the hose like a weapon, steam curling faintly off the nozzle in the heat. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm extremely all right," Patty said. "But I want it on record that they interrupted my tomatoes." Hank was still catching his breath when his phone buzzed in his pocket, an alert from the county emergency system. The same one that usually told him about rolling blackouts or red flag fire warnings. This one was different. It said something was happening at the truck stop off Highway 99, 12 miles down the road, and it was not asking anybody to conserve power this time. The Coldwater Bend truck stop had been sitting off Highway 99 for almost 40 years. A gas station, a diner, and a gift shop that mostly sold beef jerky and postcards nobody bought anymore. All baking together under the same brutal sun as everything else in the valley that week. Inside the diner, 4 retired truck drivers sat at the same corner table they had claimed every single day for the last decade, drinking coffee strong enough to strip paint. Arguing about nothing in particular, when a second ship settled into the gravel lot outside, quiet as a held breath. Big Ron looked up first over the top of his reading glasses. "That's new," Skeeter squinted through the window. "Government testing something." "Bet you it's another one of them drone programs." "Drones don't land like that," Dutch said. "Too smooth." "Too quiet." Inside, Debbie the cashier was ringing up a bag of ice when the front door swung open, and 6 more armored figures filed in, weapons raised, filling the narrow aisle between the chip rack and the beef jerky display. Their leader pointed a weapon at Debbie and announced, through the same flat translator voice, "We require your regional authority." Debbie did not stop scanning the ice. "Authority's not in today." Try the feed store down the road." The squad advanced cautiously toward the back of the store, past Big Ron's table, where Dutch leaned over and muttered. "You reckon that rifle's worth anything on the open market? Looks foreign," Skeeter said. "Bet Chuck Bradley could build one just as good. Chuck Bradley set his own mailbox on fire trying to build a smoker." "Exactly." At the back of the store, past the restrooms. The aliens found Sheriff Walt Prout, off duty, asleep in a folding chair with his hat over his eyes, having stopped in for a coffee break during his patrol. The lead alien stared down at him. "This is your regional commander," Debbie shrugged. On paper, the sheriff woke up, blinked at 6 armored aliens standing over him, and did the single most Kern County thing possible. He asked, "Y'all related to the Whitfield boys out past Delano?" The aliens were not prepared for this line of questioning, and their attempt to explain their empire, their fleet, and their conquest mandate got interrupted 4 separate times by Sheriff Prout, asking increasingly specific questions about their family tree, which delayed the entire operation by almost 20 minutes. That was long enough for Chuck Bradley to show up. Chuck was not officially part of any emergency response plan, mostly because he had been banned from 2 agricultural fairs and 1 fireworks stand for reasons the county still debated. He pulled his truck into the lot hauling a wooden contraption in the bed, something he had built for the county fair pumpkin chunking contest 2 years running, and had never quite stopped tinkering with since. He climbed out, saw the alien ship parked across 2 handicapped spaces, and grinned the exact grin that made every man in that parking lot take a step back. Because Chuck grinning meant an idea was about to happen without anybody's permission. The alien commander stepped outside to meet him. "You will surrender this outpost." Chuck looked past him at the ship. "That thing run on diesel? It is powered by antimatter compression." Chuck nodded slowly, like that answered a question he had not actually asked. "Can it tow a trailer?" The commander raised his weapon. Chuck raised the watermelon cannon. There was a long pause while the alien's translator tried to process the readout. "Is that agricultural ordnance?" "Depends who's asking," Chuck said and pulled the trigger. 40 pounds of compressed air launched a ripe watermelon clean across the parking lot, catching the commander square in the chest plate hard enough to knock him backward into the gravel. Melon rind and pink fruit spraying in every direction. The truckers inside the diner cheered, so loud the front window rattled. But even as that squad scrambled back toward their ship, 3 other Dominion units were already moving out into the foothills above town, heading for higher ground where the heat haze was thick and the brush was dry, thinking that was the safest place to regroup. They had no idea what already lived up there. The Dominion squad that pushed into the foothills above Coldwater Bend believed they had found the perfect staging ground: dense manzanita brush, rocky outcrops, and thick heat shimmer that would mask their thermal signature from anything tracking them from the air. Their scanner readouts picked up movement almost immediately, a cluster of warm bodies working through the brush below a dry creek bed, and their squad leader ordered a cautious advance, certain they were closing in on an armed human patrol. What they found instead was Diesel. Diesel was a 300-pound feral boar who had been terrorizing the hillside orchards above Coldwater Bend for going on 6 years, tearing up irrigation lines, flattening fences, and once famously chasing a county surveyor clean off the ridge and into a ditch. He traveled with a sounder of a dozen younger hogs who had learned from him that anything unfamiliar was either food or a threat, and rarely bothered sorting out which before charging. The lead alien raised a hand, signaling a halt, as Diesel stepped out from behind a manzanita bush and looked the squad over with the flat, unimpressed stare of an animal that had already beaten up a Ford pickup and considered it a fair fight. The scanner on the alien's wrist tried to classify him. Local fauna, large mammal, threat level moderate. Diesel took 1 step forward, threat level updated, personal. He charged with a speed that should not have been possible for something his size, tusks low, and the squad scattered in 6 different directions, all training abandoned in an instant. One alien fired a warning shot into the dirt that only made the younger hog squeal and joined the chase out of pure excitement. Another tried to climb a scrub oak and discovered that Dominion armor was not built with tree climbing in mind. A third activated a stealth field, which did absolutely nothing against an animal that was tracking by smell instead of sight, and Diesel found him within seconds, sending him tumbling down the dry creek bed in a cloud of dust and squealing hogs. Overhead, a CAL FIRE air tanker on a routine wildfire patrol spotted the heat signatures kicked up by the chaos below. A cluster of unusual thermal blooms moving fast through dry brush during a red flag warning, and did exactly what protocol demanded. It banked low over the ridge and released a full load of fire retardant, a thick pink cloud that dropped across the entire hillside, coating alien armor, bore, and brush alike in sticky fire suppressant. The squad that staggered out of the tree line 20 minutes later looked less like an invasion force, and more like something that had lost a fight with a paintball gun the size of a barn. Back aboard the Dominion command ship, hovering high above the heat shimmer of the valley, the beachhead commander watched the retreat feed with a deepening frown. Watching 6 armored soldiers flee downhill from what his own scanner insisted was unarmed local wildlife. "That is a trained military animal," the commander said. His analyst checked the readout twice. "Negative, sir. It appears to be unemployed." The commander straightened in his seat, jaw tight beneath his helmet, and made the decision that would define the rest of the invasion. He was done being embarrassed by farmers, dogs, watermelons, and pigs. At exactly 3 o'clock that afternoon, during the single hottest hour of the single hottest day the valley had seen in a decade, he would launch a full assault on Coldwater Bend. Walkers and dropships together, and end this resistance before sundown. He had not accounted for one thing. The heat that was slowing his own troops down inside their sealed armor was the same heat every single person in that town had lived with their entire lives. At 3 o'clock, the sky over Coldwater Bend filled with dropships, and armored walkers rolled down Highway 99 past the truck stop, past the feed store, past the water tower with the town's name painted across it in letters that had been touched up every summer since 1962. The temperature that afternoon hit 118 degrees, the kind of heat that made asphalt go soft and car dashboards crack, and inside their sealed Dominion armor. Built for 100 different climates, but never tested against a California Central Valley summer, the invading soldiers were already struggling before the fighting even started. The people of Coldwater Bend responded with the most coordinated defense in county history, which is to say nobody had agreed on an actual plan, but everybody showed up anyway. Farmers rolled tractors out into the road, using irrigation trailers as makeshift barricades. Hank and Patty Calloway parked their truck at the edge of town with Tank riding in the bed, and Patty had swapped her garden hose for the farm's biggest water tank sprayer. The one usually reserved for pesticide application, now filled with nothing but scalding hot well water saved up since morning. The first alien walker rolled straight into the dry irrigation canal that every local kid knew to avoid on a dirt bike, sinking axle deep into cracked mud. The second got tangled in an old orchard fence line that Hank had been meaning to replace for 3 years, and was now grateful he had not gotten around to it. The third was intercepted by Chuck Bradley, who had reloaded his watermelon cannon and mounted it to the bed of his truck, driving circles around the walker's legs while launching fruit at anything that moved. Across the road, someone had set up folding chairs. Someone else had started grilling despite the heat emergency warnings about outdoor cooking, because a valley crowd was not going to watch a battle on an empty stomach. Sheriff Prout opened a line to the Dominion commander, standing in the gravel lot with his hat pushed back and a bottle of water sweating in his hand. "This is Sheriff Prout," he said. "You are outnumbered, you are overheating, and you are standing in the hottest place in the state on the hottest day of the year. I would strongly recommend you reconsider." The commander's voice came back cold and sharp. "We will level this settlement." That was when he made his final mistake. A warning shot from one of his soldiers went wide and struck the base of the town water tower. The one with Coldwater Bend, painted across it in hand lettering that Debbie's own grandfather had done back when the tower was first built. The one every local kid learned to spot from the highway as the sign they were almost home. It did not fall, it did not explode, but the paint scorched and the whole town watched it happen at once. Debbie was the one who spoke first over the sheriff's radio. "You hit our water tower. Out here, that is personal. What followed, local officials would later describe as an unusually coordinated civilian response effort. Everyone else in Coldwater Bend simply called it a Tuesday. Pickup trucks rolled in from every farm road for miles, farmers armed with whatever was closest, hunters firing from the tree line along the canal. Patty leading a group of women from the church with pressure sprayers full of scalding water and homemade pepper spray that had been sitting in everyone's kitchen cabinets since the last coyote scare. Diesel the boar, still faintly pink from the fire retardant, led his sounder straight into the legs of the nearest walker, toppling it sideways into the irrigation ditch. Chuck Bradley, riding high on his watermelon cannon success, decided the truck was not enough and commandeered a crop duster from the airstrip outside town. Buzzing low over the battlefield and dumping an entire tank of leftover pesticide mixture across the retreating Dominion line, which did nothing lethal, but left every alien on that hillside coughing, blinded and smelling faintly of citrus for a week. By sundown, the invasion force that had conquered systems across the galaxy was in full retreat, dragging their scorched, sunburned, watermelon-stained commander back up the ramp of a ship that would not be returning to Kern County anytime soon. The morning after the invasion, Coldwater Bend looked almost exactly the way it always had. The water tower still stood, scorch marks and all, though Debbie's grandson volunteered to repaint it that same weekend, and the whole town chipped in to help. The irrigation canal that had swallowed an alien walker whole needed some repair work, and the county was still trying to figure out how to file an insurance claim for damage caused by. In the official report, unidentified hostile aircraft, which nobody in town found particularly funny except Chuck Bradley, who thought it was the funniest thing he had ever read. Hank Calloway walked his irrigation line again that morning, same as every morning, checking fittings, same wrench in his back pocket. Tank trotting along beside him with a slight limp that the vet said was nothing serious, just a pulled muscle from tackling an alien twice his size. Patty had gone back to her tomatoes, and when Hank asked if she was worried about the Dominion coming back, she set the pressure canner lid down on the counter between them with a meaningful look. And Hank decided that particular conversation could wait for another day. At the truck stop, Big Ron, Skeeter, and Dutch had already claimed their corner table, coffee as strong as ever. Still arguing about whether Chuck's watermelon cannon should be entered into next year's county fair, and whether it would even be allowed given what it had technically been used for. Debbie kept a scorched piece of Dominion armor plating behind the register as a souvenir, and more than a few travelers passing through on the highway stopped just to ask about it, giving the diner more business in 1 month than it had seen in a year. Sheriff Pruitt held a short press conference outside the county building a few days later, standing in front of a handful of reporters who had driven up from the city. None of them quite believing the story until they saw the scorch marks on the water tower for themselves. One reporter finally asked the question everyone wanted answered. How did a small farming town with no military training manage to repel an advanced alien invasion? Sheriff Pruitt thought about it for a moment, took off his hat, wiped his forehead, and put the hat back on. Well, he said, they came out here figuring we'd be easy. Figured a heat wave had us worn down, figured we wouldn't have the fight in us. Turns out folks who deal with 118 degrees every summer, water shortages every year, and power that shuts off right when you need it most, we don't scare easy. We're used to things trying to beat us down, we just don't let them. He adjusted his hat one more time before walking back toward his truck. Out here we call that Tuesday. The heat wave broke 3 days later, temperatures finally dropping back into the low 90s, and the whole valley breathed a little easier. The almond harvest came in just fine that fall, slightly better than expected actually. And if you ask anyone in Coldwater Bend today, they will tell you the story without hesitation. Usually while pointing at the water tower, or the scorch marks by the canal, or the watermelon cannon Chuck still keeps polished and ready in his truck bed, just in case. If this story got you through to the end, that is exactly the kind of ending this town deserves, and exactly the kind of story worth sharing. Drop a comment and tell me which local hero you would have wanted standing in your own front yard that day. Hit like if you want more stories just like this one. And subscribe so you never miss the next town that refuses to go down without a fight. Share this with somebody who needs a reminder that the little guy wins more often than you think.